It wasn't a lot of process and show and tell and taking people on the journey. That's all like, forget the journey. Like as a team, we'll go on the journey, but we don't have to take others.
Welcome to All Things Design. This is the podcast where I speak to top design leaders about how design drives digital transformation. My name is Joe Woodham. I'm the founder of Tory, Australia's leading design consultancy. We work with top brands and embed amazing designers into their teams. Our designers create experiences that millions of people use on a daily basis. Today, I'm speaking with Adam Crapp, experienced design director at Origin Energy. He's led cross-functional teams in massive digital transformations, yet still makes time to hop on a V-line train between Melbourne and the country, proving that design inspiration can strike anywhere. Adam, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Now, I want to start with the opening question. Why did you become a designer?
That is a really good question. I guess it was always in my roots. My brother people might know my brother, Ben Crapp, who's also in design. My mum was an art teacher. My father was a pharmacist, so semi-creative at times, and we were always around creative stuff when we were growing up. And so I never not had it in my mind from sort of late school, year 10 onwards. It was always my pathway. And I guess that was, at that stage, there wasn't UX design. It was around sort of graphic design more so. And so it was really about sort of being able to use my creativity and problem solving skills to create interesting and cool stuff. I'd always loved the aesthetic of design and a bit of design history. So that paved my pathway, I guess. It was, there was never any deep thought. It was just the pathway was there from sort of year 10 onwards.
Interesting. So how has it been, I guess, becoming a designer on your design journey, surrounded kind of by other designers, right? You've got your mum and your brother who are there on the same journey as you.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I mean, my big brother, Ben, one of my big brothers, they've got two of them, was on the journey. He went to Swinburne School of Design in Paran. I went to Swinburne School of Design in Paran. We've never actually worked at the same place at the same time together. I think we've worked at the same place, but yeah, we often talk about it. We talk about crossovers. Obviously, people know one of us, so that's always a nice pathway in. I don't think we've pissed anyone off too much to not have a conversation. So, but it's always been, a brother, but also his peers from design school as well, who I'm still, friends with. Some of them have taken design pathways. Some have taken other pathways now because we're getting a bit more mature in our careers. But It's always nice to be around sort of creative folk having, whether people are in ceramics now or illustration or whatever it might be, there's still the same problems to solve and still the same challenges, I guess. So it's nice having people who are, or being surrounded by people who have creative intent more broadly.
Now, please, if you like today's episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss insights from industry's top design leaders in the future. Yeah, definitely. I love the space. I think they're just fun and enjoyable people to be around.
Yeah, and there's always an element of quirkiness and creativity that sort of, that there's an undertone. I think the Melbourne sort of UX fraternity also, takes itself very seriously, but also there's an undertone of sort of welcomeness and fun and all of those things, which I certainly love that as well, because I think it helps foster good culture and sort of break down barriers. So yeah, I certainly gravitate towards those sorts of people. But yeah, nice having a brother in the same space. We're probably quite alike. He'd like to say that that's not the case, but yeah, I think we're probably quite alike in the ways that we approach work and in a fun but sort of serious way.
Talking about fun, Phil, our design director, obviously you know him very well, sent me a picture of you and him on a wine tour years and years ago when you worked at Heath Wallace, all in front of the wine bus doing a jump in the air. So it's quite funny.
We've had a really quick story. We had a great trip to Hong Kong. We're doing some testing for a China Construction Bank and QBE and a bunch of stuff when we were at Heath Wallace. And his wife at the time was big into aeroplane food for some reason. So we when we got on, we decided to take photos of all the aeroplane food, and we gave it scores and sent them through. And I think the other day I pulled up some photos, and all these photos of aeroplane food came up. So Phil and I have had some cracking times together. Probably some stories that are not fit for podcasts, but he's a lovely bloke, and I really like Phil.
Yeah, no, I love him. I think we've got many of the same stories to share. So another time. But jumping into it, I'm keen to sort of delve into your experience specifically around building agile teams in digital transformations. Where did you want to start? It's a pretty big topic.
Yeah, it sort of is. And when we say building teams, like I've been involved in teams, sort of I've built some teams with others. Like it's never a sort of a single person building a team. I think it's a team effort at the same time. And now sort of probably more in a team. I mean, building a team, or probably should say, rephrase it as being part of it and sort of building a team culture with others from product and engineering and BAs and all of that sort of stuff. So I won't take the credit for being the guy who builds agile teams in a way that people should aspire to. It's probably being part of and being around and building and tampering with all of that sort of stuff. So that's probably, if I recalibrate the conversation around that, that's probably going to be a little more interesting.
Yep. I actually know where to start. Like, you've been around for a long time. Obviously, you've worked with Phil. You guys have been in design since kind of it came onto the scene, right? So design and how it comes into digital transformations has changed quite a lot. Digital transformation used to be very, very tech-led. Talk me through like the old process, like when you're working in Agile, when Agile came about, and I guess being a part of a digital translation to now, where some of the time, like, it's nice if it's design led, or design's obviously a lot further up in the food chain.
Yeah, I mean, before Agile was a thing and became sort of part of the fabric of how design operated. Depending on the business you're in, there's always different versions, which I won't talk about today. But even early days at ANZ, I was working with likes of David Bradford and co, and we were sort of trying to form agile teams. I think probably back then a lot of it was a bit forced, and there was a lot of ceremony around it. And probably if I jump to present day, we've sort of left some of the ceremony behind and adopted more of an experimental mindset, with this clear strategic intent. We do sort of rapid cycles of learning, and then with the evidence, then sort of get into things fast and experiment. Back then it was sort of, when I was, especially at ANZ in the early days when we were sort of developing mobile and customer facing solutions in commercial banking, was there was a real ceremony and process around sprints and stand-ups and showing the sort of the leaders in the business around the way that we were approaching things, and they liked that. That was all part of that learning experience. I don't know whether it was slower or faster. It was just different, but there was a lot of building things to show and tell, as well as getting them done at the same time. Often it was sort of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. We'd design stuff, then we'd show people, then we'd have to go back and design things again. But, it was definitely a different way of working at the likes of, I keep mentioning ANZ, probably similar when I was at a company called PageUp, in a different flavor, a little bit more discovery up front. And then it was kind of like, hey, we're going to build this thing. Let's all get together and work out how we're going to build it. But, we even did, I think back in the day at ANZ, we did big room planning. I don't know whether anyone ever does that before, but it was sort of down tools for, I think we even did it for a week, where we down tools and build stories and, do story points, and as a team with the business analyst, product, UX, all part of that. So it was very collaborative and I guess objective, but also democratic at the same time. But there was a lot of process around that, right? Like I wouldn't get people in a room for that long these days. They just wouldn't. They'd be like, sorry, A, they're not in the office, and B, they wouldn't have time, right? So,
yeah.
But a very different team that I'm working in at the moment, because it's a lot smaller and we're able to sort of move a bit more here, move more rapidly, because we're able to sort of make decisions and we're empowered to make decisions. It wasn't a lot of process and show and tell and taking people on the journey. That's all, like, forget the journey. Like, as a team, we'll go on the journey, but we don't have to take others. Of course, we'll keep them across it, but the journey is the thing that the team's going to be part of, not the whole business per se. The business trusts us to deliver. So let's get on with it.
What's some of the pros and cons? Because obviously the older model, getting everyone in the room for a week, which is near impossible in current age, right?
Yep.
Like, I imagine that's expensive, it's slow, there's a lot of back and forth in comparison to what you're doing now, where you're empowered to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Joe. I'm trying to, again, I'm using ANZ and sort of current day as an example. There's probably others in between that, even Sportsbet or which I spent a little bit of time at, or PageUp potentially. So we were very much, here's the project, like here's the time frame, here's the scope of work, let's deliver to that. But in terms of differences, I don't know, like, even at the moment, the empowerment's a great thing, and we're able to sort of move from sort of clear strategic intent and sort of what that means, and sort of clarity and efficiency around focusing on that. However, because we're a small team, we're spread across a whole bunch of stuff. So it's kind of like, hey guys, let's get together for this thing and have real focus. And then the next afternoon or the next day, the focus is on another part of the project. So getting people to focus is the hardest part. I think we're able to make decisions rapidly, move on, and then go, cool, my focus is over here now, because we're a small team, but that's out of, we've chosen to be like that. Whereas if I go back to the ANZ days, it was like everyone in the room was focused on building the mobile app for Go Money back in those days. So there was no other focus. It was like big team, big focus. Obviously, the burn rate and costs were probably pretty high as well, but there was no other focus. So you go back to your desk and it wouldn't be, oh, hey, now we want you to go and do this other project. It was like you had really clear focus, so you knew sort of what the pathway was. But that meant that you had a slice of the pie, whereas now you're sort of involved in the whole pie and you've got many slices. You just got to work out how to manage them best. So often it's sort of like the biggest burning problem first and then move on to the next piece. And you might have a bite of half the pie and then go and have a bite of another piece of the pie. So getting people to focus is probably the biggest thing. A lot of it, though, on the positive side, is about trust. So people will be like, cool, I completely trust you. I'm going to go off and do this other thing for a couple of days, and when I come back, we'll have another conversation about it. So there's pros and cons, I guess, to both. I sort of like the space that I'm in at the moment, because there is a lot of trust involved in it. Some great people, and they're really pointed conversations, so people will make decisions and I guess live or die by them. That's never the case. They're not going to die by them, but you know what I mean. That's probably helped a lot. We're really lucky to have a good team. I mean, sometimes you can get one sort of disruptive person who's not aligned to the way that you're working. Hey, we're not doing this right, or we've skipped some steps. Whereas at the moment, we've got everyone who's kind of like, there's probably a bit of uncomfortableness. I often get out of meetings and go, shit, are we really good? But I think we all sort of move together in the name of progress, or wanting to make progress. So that's good. Nothing lasts forever, but at the moment it's a really good, I sort of prefer that than downing tools, doing big room planning. And yeah, we wouldn't get permission to do it these days. So
now we've talked about this in the past, but maybe one of your current team is quite senior, so you're able to have that trust yourself and trust in others that they understand their trades. So could one of the negatives of the current, format be it would be hard to bring in a junior or a mid who doesn't sort of understand things at the same level and be able to communicate that? Or is that still a non-issue?
Yeah, no, yes, I think it would be. Yeah, to bring people who are uncomfortable or need sort of nurturing in that space, would there be enough time? I guess you would make the time and bring them along for the journey, and you'd learn pretty quickly. But are they able to sort of hold their own in sort of making decisions and not, progress over perfection? Again, I hate all these buzzwords, but it really is sort of, we talk about, I think I was listening to one of your podcasts, someone from Xero and was talking around sort of, whatever artifact it is, we do stuff pretty raw until we need to get into sort of higher fidelity. And so some of that is, whether it's journey mapping or service mapping or whatever it is, but we do that in a pretty raw way. And so, and sometimes there might be some things that are left out or parts of it that are skipped, making sure that a junior designer is comfortable and knows why we're skipping some of those things. Like there's a lot of assumed knowledge, I think, in the team as well, because there's lots of people, not only senior, but who've been in energy for a long time. So they're like, cool. They don't even ask. They're like, there's a step missing there. You can tell they're thinking about it, or there's a part of the process missing, but they don't even mention it. They're like, cool. I think we maybe it's mental telepathy, but we all get it. Whereas I think if you get someone who's sort of missing that, then that can be a bit of a challenge. It just would take more hand-holding. Possibly, yes, nurturing more junior people would be a challenge. So having a more senior team is a luxury, but a good one. It just means, too, having more senior people, it means that we don't have a lot of people. So we don't have the luxury of having, my day as individual contributor is a bit of everything. You don't have the luxury of a junior contributor doing more hands-on work, let's say, whether it's more finished, polished artifacts or designs. We do all of that. And even for some of the people who are interested, when we get down to delivering our goodies to engineers, there might be some holes in it, and we make some of those assumptions and we design in code as we need to using our component library, which is pretty robust, but we'll do some of that stuff in code if we need to. So
makes sense. Like it would be hard to, I guess, take a junior or mid on that journey and have them understand why you're skipping steps without having to stop very frequently going, we're not cutting corners here, we understand this part of the process and we don't think it's necessary right here. But from an
Yeah.
education perspective, that might not be the best way to sometimes.
Yeah, well, and possibly, like, it's not that they would be at sea. It's possibly just giving them the time to be able to, again, listening to lots of your podcasts is about, being able to have sort of a growth mindset for the individual. Like, how do you set a way to progress them, grow them, be career orientated in a sort of a experimental, probably space where, we do often cut corners where we need to. So, would you be giving them the best view of sort of what can be, but also can do. Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's take a few steps back. Obviously, you're working in a unique team at the moment, which is probably a relatively rare situation to be in. But going back to sort of being a part of well-established, highly functioning, agile delivery teams, like what makes a good team? Like what's the right communication style, and how does design play a pivotal role in that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I'll use the sort of the bigger bank example here, ANZ, and again, I'm going to credit the likes of people like David Bradford and Chris Khalil, who I was working with and for at those stages. It takes a fair bit from leadership to lean into that stuff. Big teams, there's certainly not the Telstra size, but I think we were sort of 50 designers. This is 6-7 years ago now, maybe more, 10. And that was quite big. And so I think it takes a bit of vision from the leaders, the design leaders, to make sure, we're embedded in the right projects and how we're embedded. Also the right people in the projects. So there was always a mix of sort of senior, junior, doers, thinkers, strategic sort of thinkers, service designy type people. So getting the right group of people together in an agile team. I'm talking more about design. Obviously there's all of the, you need the product, you need the business, you need the engineers, you need everybody who's involved, architects, the whole works. But getting the right designers together, I think, who can collaborate with each other in a way that doesn't sort of tear projects apart, is more family than it is trying to tear each other down. I've been in some of those projects where it's kind of like new person comes in, it's kind of like, you're doing it all wrong and this isn't the way to do it. Like, I think having an approach where it's about learning how the team works as well as what the strategy is. And then, having, again, I'll credit David Bradford for this. I'll stop being the David Bradford creditor in a minute. But David, if you're listening, you owe me a beer. Is my style back then was really about doing and getting stuff done. David was very much an advocate for collaboration, managing up and stakeholder expectations, big projects at ANZ, lots of suits, people like being walked through stuff. And so, that we had, the Agile ceremony was rich back then. So, our daily stand-ups, everybody at the board, it was very visual. We'd have sort of walkthroughs at the end of each week. We'd send out updates. It was over communication. And so that seemed to work really well in terms of being agile and making decisions. And so before people, if I look back at it, it was sort of people came to the table knowing that if they didn't take the time, they didn't. But if they took the time with all the information was in front of them, they sort of knew the decision to be made, so that they could ask the right questions. And so, that I think is sort of the foundation, even for what I'm doing now, is sort of give people the time, give them the information that they need to be able to make a decision, not just on the spot, because no one likes making big decisions on the spot. They always feel uncomfortable. So, I take a lot of that process into what I'm doing now. It's just probably a lot less posture around it and theatre in a sense. And I mean that in the best way, like theatre in, when we were at ANZ, there was walls of shit. There was screens with our prototypes on that people could use. Darren Baird would walk around with prototypes telling the execs that these were live when they weren't, and we'd have to build them then. So like, it was sort of like there was that posture about sort of showing. But I learned a lot because I was, as I said, I was heads down, bums up. It was just I'd always found that I could get through things if I just got stuff done and shared it. A lot of what the people who I mentioned before were about was sort of some of the collaboration and communication and the theatre of that to sort of gain permission to continue to move forward. That's probably the biggest thing I think about back then. Also, there was a bit more money around and teams were a bit bigger and people wanted to experiment. This is 10 years ago. The environment was a fair bit different.
You talked about communication styles and over communicating. Like, it was quite funny listening to the ANZ stories about walking around saying that we've prototyped this and hadn't even started yet. But like, over communicating what you're doing and how you're doing it, how has things changed over the last 10 years since ANZ days in terms of businesses understanding the importance of design, and then how designers communicate with stakeholders internally?
Yeah, back then I think it was a little bit of theatre. I think now there's probably less of that. They're like they don't. You say you're a UXer, and it's not like it's a rite of passage or a ticket to sort of disrupt stuff. It's just like you're part of the furniture, especially at Origin at the moment. Not like we're a unique thing. We're part of the business. Like we're embedded. That people want your opinion. Like it's just you're treated like anybody else. So there's no having to sort of scream about what you do, how you do it, why you do it. Of course, there's frustrations. I think that's just part of any role, but certainly in design, where it's kind of like, why aren't people listening? We should be doing it a different way. Why aren't we? Sort of embedding some of our research a little bit more? Why are we doing the same research again that we did a little while ago? Like those things just continue to happen, but probably showing my age with my grey hair, but mature enough to sort of go, cool. There's ways around that now, but I think, it's probably changed a little bit. But again, it will depend on the business. I'm sure some of the people you've talked to are a little bit different, but in my team, in the broader team that I'm in, people get it. They want to be part of it. The communication side of it, I think that some of that still rings true. Like you've got to sort of sell the idea a little bit, or I've been sort of terrible at it, but when we release things, lots of people in my team are great at singing the praises, and I'm always thinking about moving on to the next thing. So I definitely have to get better at doing some of that. And 10 years ago, that the people I was just talking about, that they were really good at that, and probably still are really good at that. So it's just something that I'm sort of learning still to do. But I think, it's probably changed less now. It's sort of like, especially because we're at home too, less artifacts on walls, all those sorts of things. It's more communicating about the success of certain initiatives from a business perspective and how they align to some of our objectives of what we want to achieve. And then it's how do we operationalize some of those things, like here are the things that we're delivering to help get to that, and this is what they've achieved. So maybe that comes with time and maturity, but also probably a little bit about the business too, because they care about the design. Cool, hey, that stuff's great. Like, how is it impacting what we're delivering and to the strategy? So that's probably, certainly my experience, but probably how my own career has changed. But that's probably the biggest thing, I guess, over time. They still cared about it 10 years ago. I just probably wasn't very good at articulating it.
Yeah. Going back to that, I'm exactly the same. I've really struggled to reflect on past wins, and the only way that I've been able to do it is lock in a specific time. Because if I have to talk through something that we've done really well to the team or in front of the team, I'll have to sit there and think about it and go, what actually worked well, what didn't work well, and then sort of talk them through that. And if it's scheduled in, it just means I have to do it. But otherwise, I'll just move on to the next thing.
And celebrating successes and all those sorts of things. I'm sure we're working with some consultants at the moment. I'm sure, like, we're always talking about, hey, great, great release. We just did a release the other day, great release, or hey, individual contributors, we call out all of those sorts of things. But I think just more broadly to the business, haven't been as good as, I really care about the culture of the team that I'm surrounded by, and hopefully that precipitates out to other teams in the business. But I'm particularly bad at sort of spruiking, certainly my own work, but also the because it's never your own, it's a team effort, but is more broadly. So I've just got to get better at some of that stuff. But I think that's probably changed. Again, back to your question around sort of how it's changed over time. I think probably it's more about delivering. People can see it and acknowledge it now, whereas back then it was kind of still a bit mysterious. Design this thing, it was very different, especially in those days at ANZ. We were different cats, right? There was lots of suits, and here these guys walking in trainers and t-shirts and all of those things. That's just time that has changed that. But I think the conversation, the way we do stuff, the posture we take has all changed over time, and how we celebrate stuff. So
definitely has changed quite a lot. I remember having to wear a suit just turn up to a meeting just seems foreign and weird.
Yeah, it was just back then. It was a bit of culture change across the board for the banks, and I think talking to people at NAB, it was similar. And whether it was CommBank, I think when I was at Heath Wallace, we were doing some work with CommBank and Westpac, probably similar as well. So you could sort of block, justify what you were doing and how you were doing it. So the best way to do that was to talk about it, over communicate it, all of those sorts of things. Use all the tools in the toolbox, basically. And so now I just sort of pick and choose the tools that I need to use at the right time. But
yep. Now let's talk about maybe leadership, because obviously you've worked in so many environments, like ANZ, obviously huge, Origin, pretty big.
Yep.
In terms of, let's say, the leadership and how that impacts the rest of the design function, like, Have you worked with incredible leaders that have been super inclusive and obviously sat down and reflected on all the good work the team does? But like, what kind of makes a good leader and
Yeah.
helps the design function
Yeah, I've had
prosper?
lots of. I've been lucky enough to. They've all been good leaders, actually. Even the shit ones have been good, and you learn from you learn from them. But I've seen people make, and it's easy to. I think that's one of the problems with design is people sort of, there's no other profession. I talk to others about where they're kind of like, oh, that accountant's he's a knob, or like I wouldn't hire him, or like I think there's a bit of that in the industry, which I hate. But I've had lots of good leaders for all different sorts of reasons. I think leaders that listen, and have their ear to the ground and can understand how the team's feeling. Even in my own leadership, if I've been in a leading role, how are people perceiving or being perceived is really important. So when morale's low, leaders that can listen are really, I think that's the biggest thing, and I've been lucky to have all of those. What they do with that information can be different, but yeah, people who listen and are able to sort of take action in terms of culture, because I think a lot of leadership is about creating a culture of safety, and part of that is listening to people. And you don't always make the right decisions as leaders, and you probably don't always lean in when you need to. But I think the other one is about exactly that. Like once you've listened, when do you need to lean in, whether it's into work or a solution, or lean back from that. But I guess jumping to myself, my sort of style, or I think I've had success when I probably listen a little bit more, are a bit more hands off and directional, rather than sort of hands on and sort of in the weeds. Because I'm not, I'm certainly not a detail kind of guy. So I'll let others deal with that. But making people feel like that they're on the right track, asking the right questions and listening, I think is the biggest one. But yeah, the best leaders I've had are certainly listeners.
How do you get the balance right? Because you obviously straddled the two, people management, and at the moment it's more of an individual contributor where you actually get in the weeds and deliver. So
Yeah.
people management and delivery is so different, and you can kind of lean towards one or the other.
Yeah, it is. And I reckon going back into people management now, I'd have to sort of check myself and make sure my skills are up to speed. But yeah, I think empowering people, all the buzzwords, empowering people, listening, collaborating, bit of psychological safety, all of those things count for a lot. So making sure that's fundamental to the team. And then, managing personalities, I think is a key one. So spending enough time with people to be able to. And again, I'll use this as my individual contributor piece, because often I have to check myself as an individual contributor, as I would have a leader, to go, am I listening enough? Am I doing this the right way? Am I communicating it in the right way? So probably more as an individual contributor now, because I'm kind of like, people don't get what I'm doing. Like, I don't have others. There's others within Origin I can go to and talk to in terms of designers, but I need to sort of check myself sometimes. So probably reading more than I ever have about how to manage that stuff. I'm looking at people's posts a little bit more. I'm listening to more podcasts like yours. So I've had to do a little bit more of that kind of stuff as an individual contributor, because I don't have the people around to be able to do some of that stuff that I've probably had in the past, where you're sitting next to someone and you can sort of turn around and go, hey, I'm having this problem. Like, how do I, whether it's a people problem or a project problem, how do I lean into it, solve it? You can have a conversation. It's sort of weird to pick up or call someone on Slack and have that conversation. So yeah, I'm probably thinking a lot more about it now than I have in the past.
No, interesting. Like, over your journey as a designer, I was going to ask this anyway, so good segue. What's one thing that you've either learnt or read or listened to that's really shaped you as a designer?
It's probably learnings over those. I mean, I've been reading more. I've been particularly bad at it with 3 kids and having the time. I also spend a truckload of time on a train now, learning to spend less time on my phone and read more. So it's been really interesting. I I guess from, probably like we were talking about before, is the leaders that I've had in the past, is looking at and sort of learning from experiences with those guys. Like, what did I do? What did I do right? What did I communicate wrong? And so I'm probably a bit more introspective on that and retrospective in some ways on those things now. And so those experiences have gone, well, how do I find a better way? And so reading articles, all of those sorts of things on better ways to communicate and be heard and be a better designer. I guess the one thing to answer your question is probably about staying in the moment, not getting sort of into the sort of solution too early, and staying innovative is, I find, really challenging in this current space. I've had, dark times over the last 6, 12, 18 months where I've had creative block for various reasons, whether it be sitting on the train and not sleeping enough or worrying about building a house or any of those things, but is like how to get yourself out of some of that stuff. And I think, from other people's experiences, is I've learned that lots of people have that stuff and lots of people need change and challenge. And sort of, even after being somewhere for a while, how do you reinvent yourself or keep yourself invigorated? They're probably the biggest challenges and learnings that I find. I don't lie awake at night. I probably sit on the train and think about them staring out the window. Yeah, how do you stay relative in an environment like we've got at the moment is probably the biggest thing.
Interesting. Yeah. I've noticed I go in like seasons with this. So I'll go through a really creative phase where I'm excited about everything. I'm highly engaged. I want to try something new. And then a phase where I just want to chill and just do BAU stuff.
Yeah. So Joe, how do you keep yourself sort of on top of things, or what are some of the things that you've learned through that? I mean, obviously a very different environment for you. It's a lot of it's about people management, but how do you keep yourself on top of stuff?
Actually, surprisingly, Phil does all the people management, so less about people. Look, for me, I love learning. So like my biggest thing is like developing new skills. So if I find myself in a slump, I try and look for what can excite me through learning, and then just kind of being in that moment. So like for me, for a consultancy, the last 18 months or 24 months has been very slow. So what other things can I do from an operational perspective? I've been building some AI software to see if we can improve some operational efficiencies. And I find that plays over into other areas of, I guess, how I turn up in managing or leading the business. So just finding new things to focus on.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, the turning up spot is probably, as I said, the sort of times over the last sort of 18 months or so, like the turning up is probably the like, how do you turn up and be the best version of yourself? Again, getting a bit deep now, but I think that's a really important one too. Like, we all have off days, but especially as a designer, like being on top of new stuff. And I being an IC can be a bit lonely sometimes, but there's such a good dialogue that happens, at events, but also online, that I'm spending a lot more time sort of looking and reading and pondering thoughts than I ever have before, which is sort of, it's helped me reinvigorate, because it certainly was challenging for a little period of time.
Actually, going back to something you said about stopping and like thinking about the wins, like I catch up with my management team once a week, and over the last 18 months, it's been more important for me to be focusing on all of the things that we are doing right, as opposed to the things that aren't going well. So like over the last 18 months, I think maybe we've become more positive as a team because we're focusing on all of the small wins and communicating better internally.
Yeah, and I've always been a bit skeptical of things like, we've done a whole bunch of sort of courses across my journey, whether it be sort of leadership stuff, but we recently did one, the Paul Roos one, Performance by Design. Anyway, go and check it out. The business decided that we'd do it, and one of it was around sort of giving feedback and candid feedback. And I've worked with a couple of ripper people. There's a guy called Chris Donlan. If anyone knows him, he's also done this leading out of drama, which I really assimilate to, because it's sort of probably my style a little bit more, and it's about how you have a conversation about drama, because it can be so distracting for a team. And he's given some ripper stories deep in the work and getting shit done and being an individual contributor. You don't pop your head out enough. So I've been reading a little bit more about that stuff and trying to reinvest in that a little bit more, and sort of try things with the team, like not tell them, but I'm trying some of those things that I learned during those courses back again with the team, like I think it's called Performance by Design. For the Paul Roos piece, is the Sydney Swans coach, the ex-coach.
That's what I was thinking. It's like, yeah, all right, got it.
So,
I'll look
and I don't think he's actively involved, but he's obviously done it with football teams and all of those sorts of things. I won't bore you with that. But lots of it was around, especially for leadership, is sitting down and kind of going, hey, I really loved this stuff that you've done this week, but I was a bit disappointed by X, or you could get better at these things. So it's receiving feedback and giving feedback. And I think that's a really important part when you're an individual contributor, is knowing whether you're on the right track and all of those sorts of things. So I sort of encourage people to, I often ask and say, hey, is there any feedback for me? Is there things we could have done better? It's like a retro. I mean, we all know the tools. It's just actively embedding them in your day-to-day.
See, like, I can relate. I'm not an individual contributor. I've got a team, but I don't report to anyone technically. So I've got mentors, I've got coaches that are always driving me, pushing me, and telling me what I need to do next, or helping me on that path. Because I'm sort of the person directing the rest of the team. So like, I've got to have someone that's already been there and done that to shine a light on what we should be doing next.
And it's really important, I think, as a designer. Like if I talk to my younger self, it's always a question people ask: what would you tell your younger self? But like, I wouldn't have changed anything. Like, my design journey's been really fun, and I've met some really amazing people, and people who I'm still inspired by and aspire to be like. But you can't force yourself; so you've got to be yourself. But I think there is, outside of the design, and people are always, specific around sort of the journey that they've been on and the teams that they're in. And we talked a lot about Agile and the benefits and those things. But I think at the end of the day, whether you're an accountant or a designer, like, having the chance to be reflective and think about the way that you're doing things is really important. So at the end of projects or at the end of weeks, or while you're sitting on the train for 3.5 hours in the V line.
One way.
One way. Yeah.
I'm glad it's you, not me. I can't do it. Like, I remember the drive, because obviously my wife is from Wodonga, so that drive is the longest, most boring drive. I'd rather sit on a train and do something.
The train's awesome. People watching, and I think that's one thing too.
Yeah.
Like, I love people, so I love people watching this. I've definitely got some ripper stories, which again I'll tell on other channels. But it's just part of. I mean, that's part of also being who I am. I love growing up. I loved growing up here, and I loved my kids growing up here. So the sacrifices that you make are sort of important, I think.
It's very different, right? Like, I grew up in the country, and I've lived I don't live in the city anymore, but I lived in the city for quite a while, and it's a very, very different lifestyle. So it's worth the try.
Like yourself, I mean, you live internationally now, so I mean, you make things work. You make sacrifices. I don't think it changes the work you do or who you are. You just do it in a different way. In fact, I probably think it brings people at work are always giving me shit about where I live and all the bogans, but they've never lived here. So, but I think it does bring a different perspective. Like, I have one life, but I have two lives. I've got a city life and a country life, and they're intertwined, and they both bring positives, I think. So I encourage anyone to try it, but certainly up to the individual.
Yeah, definitely. I think, in the most recent years, everyone is kind of moving out. Just wrapping this up, like, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, Adam. So many great takeaways. I'm sure people will want to reach out. Best way to contact you via LinkedIn?
Yep, sure is. Please, happy to have chats. I've had some lovely messages even over the last month of people who are sort of rekindling relationships who I've worked with in the past. So that's actually been a really nice thing as well to talk about. So yeah, it's really good. Encourage it more and more.
Definitely. Well, I'm sure you could reach out to Phil anytime, and he'd love to have a chat.
I'll see him next week for a drink. Yeah.
Beautiful. Enjoy.
You guys are super inclusive, and it's really lovely. I mean, this is part of why I'm doing this. Is it's nice having, I guess, businesses like yours who are really inclusive to designers and encouraging people to do this sort of stuff. Otherwise, I probably never would.
Well, unfortunately, you're taking my spot, because I won't unfortunately be able to be there. I'm not there for another 2 weeks, but enjoy.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
See you later. Enjoy your day.
Take care.
That's it for today's episode. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you hit subscribe. Also, leave us a comment and a like. It helps people like yourself find this video.